Grüezi miteinander. Buongiorno, hello, and welcome to this online event that celebrates SVIZRA, the latest collection of chapbooks from Strangers Press, a publishing house at the UEA in Norwich. That's the University of East Anglia. There are 8 booklets in all in this recent series of contemporary literature from Switzerland. Each of that nation's 4 national languages are given 2 chapbooks, so you have 2 chances to read each of the national languages. That's translations from French, German, Italian, and Romansh, respectively. And by the way, Romansh, the Romansh word for Switzerland, SVIZRA, gives its name to the entire project. And this project is generously funded by Elvezia. The hills are alive with the sound of Switzerland, but if that turn of phrase evokes kitsch, then in 8 translations we encounter a Swissness that is considered, charming, and uncanny in equal measure. We read about hiking in the mountains, but as experienced by 2 different migrants, whose lives are uprooted and who experience the landscape in their own way and who make it their own. Elsewhere, I was struck by the description of an unsettling smell of fur stoles from a shop beneath one author's studio, a smell seeping into the nostrils and interfering with the writer tasting coffee, with their act of writing, and cloaking memories of certain characters that, on the page, come together in a literary passage that reflects on luxury consumption and destruction by humankind. This is a contemporary Switzerland then, and it's one that is mediated by diverse experiences, and now by a group of 8 translators, some of whom you'll hear from today. They and the authors read from their work and they'll answer your questions. There'll be a chance to ask your questions later on, and I'll be interviewing one pair of an author and translator as well. I'm Seán Williams, and I'm joining you today from the other side of the Alps, from Venice, which is not Switzerland, although one 19th century poetry anthology to Switzerland, published by English holidaymakers, spuriously included a chapter on Venice too. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Languages and Cultures at the University of Sheffield, but more importantly, I'm a Swissophile, making radio programs and writing non-fiction features, often on Swiss themes. Today, though, I'm just the master of ceremonies, as it were, for this celebration and book launch. The hard work has been done by the authors, translators, and publishing team, many of whom are on this Zoom call. I'd like to introduce you at this point to Lucy Rand, who is the guest editor of the series, and she worked together with the in-house editor, Nathan Hamilton from Strangers Press. Lucy is an acclaimed literary translator. She works from Italian into English, and she also edits a new audiobook app called Audrey, which pairs stories read aloud with a literary guide. So Lucy, hello, and tell us then, how did this project come about?
Hi, Seán. Thanks for the introduction, and hello, everybody. The project started in 2019 at the British Centre for Literary Translation summer school, which I had come back to Norwich from Japan in time for, and I met at that summer school Eleanor Chapman, who is my co-translator of this book from the series, and I also met Nathan, who is the managing editor of the UEA publishing project, of which Strangers Press comes within. And there was a lot of buzz about Swiss Italian literature, because that was the sponsored, it was being sponsored by Helvezia. And I think Nathan and I just said, oh, we should do a collection on Swiss Italian literature. And then that was kind of it. And then 2 years later, I moved back to Norwich and met Nathan again, and he'd already started the conversation with Helvezia about a Swiss collection, and by that point Eleanor and I had already translated about half of the book that we have ended up doing, and yeah, it went from there.
Fantastic. So it's had quite a long gestation, and maybe at this point, before we come back to talking about it, we should hear some extracts from at least from 4 of the chapbooks and cover those 4 languages, so not only Italian, but also German, French, and first up, Romansh. So Hannah Felce translated the 2 chapbooks from Romansh, and she's now going to read us an extract from As If Nothing Were. Hannah grew up in a Romansh-speaking village herself in the Engadine, and she has a PhD in translation studies. Hannah, over to you.
Hello, today I'm going to be reading from As If Nothing Were by Plouda, who is an award-winning Romansh author from the Engadine Valley in the Swiss Alps. This time I come from above, over hills, through hollows, and over hills again. Then I see the cabin a little further down below, small and brown, alone on a patch of grass, scattered with dwarf mountain pines. The grassy slopes and scree on the other side of the valley are already in the shade. Here the sun still warms the cabin walls, the table and bench in front of the door, and the grey stack of firewood. You are standing, a little stooped, next to the small wooden fountain and are brushing your teeth, legs apart, hair dishevelled. The wind is blowing, as it always does towards evening, and water sputters from the spout. Next to the fence are cushions of moss, fairy thimbles and grasses. I open the door and the shutters. The mountain fills the window. Clouds are slowly drifting beyond. A shaggy cat, 2 faces kissing. A huge bug, embryos. I stand outside the cabin for a long time, looking into this wild, grey and lonely valley. The scree you like so much on the other side of the valley looks like a big, dry tongue, split several times at the tip, creeping between the mountain pines. You can hear the bells of cows looking for food among the gravel and stones on the valley floor. Clouds drift between the mountain, but faster than before. They have claws and big open mouths. The sky is in turmoil. I remove my harmonica and play a tune for you. Meanwhile, you climb the scree, approaching the cave. It is windy and the waves batter the wall more vigorously than usual. I could not paint this lake. It's just like the sunset. I can only watch and wait until all of a sudden I am sitting at the parlour table amidst the clatter of cups, plates and spoons, the sound of the chairs being pulled back and forth on the wooden floor, and the gruffness of your voice. Everyone is talking at the same time. The window is open. Inside is quite dark because of the acer outside. The sun and the smell of hay are on the windowsill. The window pane reflects a piece of the landscape. I start playing with the window. The landscape moves. I am a girl again, standing in the kitchen in front of the open window. It is summer. Reflected in the window pane is a slope of the church and the cemetery, with the crosses that stick out above the stone wall. I move the window back and forth. The church dances. The crosses move. The sun warms my hand and my striped apron. This village is just my village, new and different. From the dimness of the attic, wardrobes and drawers squint back at me, boxes and dark piles of junk beside them. In the photo album, there are black and white pictures, serious and unfamiliar faces, rarely a hint of a smile. The drawers are still tough to open. They are full to the brim. Winter clothing, dolls' clothes, masks and carnival garb. In the big wardrobe hang coats and jackets. And here are your small dark red sandals with the raised insole in the heel, ankle strap and metal buckle for closing. Their fronts adorned with 3 small holes shaped like pine kernels. Light brown soles with worn grooves. They have lost their shape a little, your shoes, especially the left one, and the red is a little faded. Petit shoes is written on the soles, size 18. You can hardly see the P on the right shoe anymore, nor the S on the left. There are windrows of half-wilted grass all around, a swollen petrol can and countless insects in this heat. You walk up through the field, stop by the rocks, by the steps. Walk up to the cabin and sit on the bench. You stroke your dog's head and pick up the binoculars. Perhaps there are deer somewhere in the slope opposite. Ants are running back and forth at your feet. The cabin door is open. Water is on the boil inside. While I put in the spaghetti, you stand next to me at the stove and tell me something. I do not understand what you are saying. Now go and wash your hands, I say. and put the plates back on the table. Later, you walk along the path to the bridge. The clouds are moving fast. Tourists appear from the valley. From a distance, they look like colourful moving dots. And then they are here, walking past you, and a child turns and stares. It is dark in the cabin. Only your voice can be heard, singing about a sleeping village. The houses in your song have wide facades and lit windows that slowly extinguish one after the other. The water coming from the fountain is a dark splutter, and sometimes a car's headlights glide across the roofs, the facades, and the trees scattered with drowsy birds. Someone is standing at the window, looking out into the night. It is a village with gardens and courtyards, with a church and a football pitch. The people are dreaming their dreams, and here and there someone is awake, thinking. And above everything, like sprinkles of glitter, are the stars. For the people in the village below, they awaken something like a distant memory, until one day their lives are extinguished like the lights in their windows. That is how your song ends. Your voice lost somewhere between the buildings and the gardens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And as I said, Hannah translated both of the Romansh chapbooks. This reading was from an author who was, as Hannah said, also prize winning and won the Schiller Prize back 20 odd years ago. So the moral of the story is to read both of them, and I apologize for getting confused. But thank you, Hannah. And next up is Elena Pala reading from Elvezia's House, a translation from Italian. And Elena has published a number of translations and worked with the author Alexandre Mine and his novel La Chiave nel Latte before. And that's the novel from which this chapbook is an extract. She did that work with Alexandre as part of a program for emerging translators run by the National Centre for Writing. And the novel from which this chapbook is taken, La Chiave nel Latte, is in its original Italian, also a prize-winning work. It won the Swiss Literature Prize in 2019. Elena is going to read 3 fragments for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Seán. I see Elvezia, her grey, slick-back hair, her twinkling eyes, the bulging veins on her neck. She's wearing a dark knee-length skirt, woolen socks and clogs. He is sitting at the table, slouching. I see my aunt and her husband too, standing in front of the sideboard in the living room. She's dressed in black, gold sparkles on a brown skin. He's wearing a light-coloured shirt and is almost bald. They're all looking at the floor, smiling amiably. They're looking at me. I'm on the rug, maybe sitting, maybe lying down. Maybe it's just a photo. Maybe my mother took it. See the bars on my cot bed, the chipped wall paint, the stuffy, thinly lit room. The floor creaks under Elvezia's clogs. He's wearing a white nightgown with a flower print. She comes closer, wraps the bunched up duvet at my feet, and pulls it over my shoulder. Say nothing, curl up on one side, put my hands between my knees, and wait. She strokes the back of my neck. She likes that, feeling my curls in her hand. Me, I like running my fingers on the back of her hands, tracing the web of her veins, gently pressing down from time to time. Shapes and colours are fading away. I can hear Elvezia. Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. The words come to me muffled, perhaps because I've hidden my head under the duvet, or perhaps from falling asleep. I've learned both the Our Father and Hail Mary. I repeat in my head, and we forgive those who trespass against us. I hear these prayers every day. Elvezia sometimes asks me to recite them with her, often before meals on Sunday. Sometimes she recites them by herself, under her breath, her head bowed. Her lead us not into temptation. Hear the floor creaking, Elvezia's bed springs groaning. She pulls the cord, all dark. Amen. Square is transformed. In the shade of the old pines, along the low wall, where cars are usually parked, the organizer set up the mobile kitchen and bar, with the cases of fizzy drinks, the refrigerator, bread baskets, and the huge smoking cauldron. The stone wall is covered in posters. The rest of the square is taken up by wooden tables and benches. Elvezia gave me a 20-franc note. I dug it out of my pocket, buy a soft drink, and grab the cutlery. Sitting with the other kids, having fun, waiting for our turn. Only when they hand me the plate that I'm reminded of what my mother said over the phone. They're disgusting animals. You know they even eat food. I ask if I can please have the risotto without sausages. Shock, amazement. They want to know why. Why all the fuss all of a sudden? I've always eaten them. I've not eaten them. I think so. I answer that I'm not very hungry. Shut up and eat, they reply in unison. Walking back to my table, I look at the sausages. My mother's words come back to me. It's in our sacred book, the Quran. I don't know what to do. I wonder if I'll go to hell. What kind of punishment awaits me? Sit down and eat sausages. A pleasant early summer evening. A ton of people coming and going everywhere, the streets heaving. I'm leaning against the railings. The sky is still blue. Pinskow, a military truck appears. We want biscuits. It's free, we shout in French. The soldiers throw us several pants. We divvy them up between us. Someone is saying he's going to get himself rejected. But you have to wake up before. You have to mark and obey the bloody Swiss girls. Give them this cousin. If you like, you're fucking nuts on them. They'll reject you, send you back home. Someone else, though, can't wait to go and throw hand grenades like Rambo, or shoot a rifle like Huckleberry into this cabin. What about you? Me? I shake my head and nod my finger. It's Swiss, am I? I'm from Morocco. So, no national, which doesn't bother me at all, actually. What, not even in Morocco? My mother explained to me that citizens who reside abroad don't get called up. Because she also said that we too often pleasant fun. They've been getting any younger. My mother's at it again. You can feel my anger mounting. It corrupts the stuffy air we breathe, crumbles the plaster on the cracked walls. In the whistling noise the old fridge makes. It's in Elvezia's wrinkled face and her faltering whispers. It's in our ears. Elvezia is sitting in the armchair now, her swollen, teary eyes keep wandering. Mine seek shelter elsewhere too, in her emaciated legs, in the fiery orange glass pane of the stove, that kept us warm through so many winters and now huffs and puffs. Fallen 3 times this month. We can't say them, the words that have invaded and clouded her tired mind for hours, days, months. She doesn't want to hurt me, but we both know. Neither of us wants to be there. We wish we could put off this moment again, imagine a different reality, some miraculous alternative that might come to death, Saturday inevitable. Instead, we sit here in silence. I've never seen it clouded.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll move now from Italian to French, and Julie Guinand is an author who has won literary prizes as well, so it's really a prize-winning bunch that we've brought together here. This time, prizes from the cantons of Bern and Jura in Switzerland. She wrote the novel Survivante, which has been translated from French as Survivor by Rosie Eyre. Rosie has published a few works already from French as well as from Spanish into English, and she too has won commendations for her work. Julie will now read for us in hers and in Rosie's words.
All right, so this is a diary, so I'm going to read some of the first entries. Day 1, darkness. Without a crackle or flicker of warning, the living room cuts from yellow to black. I put down my book and grope for the lamp on the side table. More on autopilot than in optimism, I press at the switch. Click, click, click. No response. The bulb is already cold against my finger pads. In the 10 months since we moved to Maison Monsieur, there have been 4, maybe 5 power cuts. No biggie then. But as I press away like a nutter at the lamp switch, my heart can't help staggering ever so slightly. I stand up to try the big light. No joy. Bloody typical, just when my book was hotting up as well. I fumble for my phone, tap it into torch mode, and venture out into the hallway. Through the oversized window, I can see the Doubs. Its glassy surface glints as the clouds drift by. The restaurant next door is bathed in darkness. But I know the neighbors have closed up for a fortnight. We got together for drinks before they left, toasting the Bahamas and the start of spring. I suddenly feel chilled to the core. Day 5. My powerless life is a sequence of blunders. I go through the same old motions without distinguishing between those that still serve a purpose and those that have lost all sense. I flick the light switch as I enter the bathroom, set down the kettle on the perpetually cold stove, check my unresponsive phone, open and close the fridge door, press my hands to the radiator in the hope of gleaning some warmth. Occasionally, I find myself chuckling at these reflexes. Nota bene, a list of genius inventions which didn't seem like anything special before. The Hoover, the dishwasher, the hi-fi, the fridge, the oven, radio, hot water. Day 6. Wrung out. I drift through the house aimlessly, devoid of hope. It's Sunday today. By my reckoning, the odds of the power returning on a Sunday are close to nil. Monday, though, seems like a fitting day for order to be restored. I cling to this. Day 7. Still no power, no light, no hot water, and not the faintest trace of signal. Something's wrong. Day 9. I'm not a natural pessimist, but I have occasionally pondered what would happen in an apocalypse, how I'd react, what new reserve of strength I might discover, how far my survival instinct would push me. I imagined a lot of things: the initial shock and ensuing days, the cold, silence, fear, and emptiness. I imagined a lot of things, but not this. My stomach swarming with the same butterflies as the first time I fell in love. Day 12. I had fixed ideas about the end of the world, inspired by the disaster films I gorged on as a teenager. For example, it could only happen in New York, at night, and God knows why, at the weekend. Also, dead-bee skies laden with black clouds, flashes of lightnings, an earthquake, sirens, collapsed roads and buildings, wailing. Here, everything is a picture of calm. The 5 buildings that make up the hamlet of Maison Monsieur, of which just 2 are occupied, stand perfectly erect. The road, though deserted, still snakes along overhead. The forest around me is turning green. The Doubs is rippling ever so gently in the breeze, and the sky is feathered with clouds. Have I made it all up? Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. And that was Survivor. And now we move on to German. And for our final reading, we'll hear an extract from Provinces, written by Tabea Steiner and translated by Jozef van der Voort. Their collaboration actually began with a podcast on literature in lockdown that the three of us made together and which was funded by the Swiss Cultural Fund, the UK, in 2020. Tabea's first novel, Baeg, was nominated for the Swiss Book Prize in 2019, and when Tabea's not writing, she's busy organising literary festivals in Thun and Bern. Jo, meanwhile, has previously published with Strangers Press in the chapbook series on Dutch literature. You might like to check that out as well. It's called Verzet, the series. And in news that's hot off the press and closer to an Alpine theme, Jo won the prize for the Austrian Cultural Forum's translation competition this year in 2022. And Jo, you're going to read an extract for us.
So this is an essay called Bar 63. In Zurich's nightlife district, where Hollandstraße meets Zieniestraße, stands Bar 63. People from across the world live here, and there's a bar on every corner of the crossroads. Biondi to the right, Midway Bar and catering services to the left, and Kaiser Franz across the way. Bar 63 has an expensive mirror suspended at a slight angle over the counter, so you can watch what's happening from above. A continual recitation of the moment. At the foot of the mirror, there are bottles arranged in rows, a shelf full of gin, and just below it, from every region on earth, the rum. They're sure to have what I need. Winters when I hanker after rum. In summer, it's gin. The rain still feels cold, but the evenings are growing brighter again. I am drawn to the heat of the tropics, locked up in the sweetness of the sugarcane. My rum comes with a square of rich, bitter chocolate. I swirl this liquid sugar and set down the snifter, see my mirrored hands multiply in its bellied curve, resting on the many hands that have already held this glass, yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. Every one of us, they say, is linked by 7 intersections. The rum is sharp but sweet. In the muted light, the rum is sharp but sweet. In the muted light, it gleams golden. How many people have toiled over this small measure? How many have cut and pressed and sold and distilled the sugarcane, have stored and bottled and shipped, and finally brought it here and poured it for me into this short-stemmed, bulbous glass? The music grows louder, live from the garden. Grown man rap at its best. Come buy our bitch. My grandfather imported sugarcane, one of the first to do so, and joined forces with a dentist to fight the introduction of heavily refined crystalline sugar, writing letters to the Ministry of Health. Looking at the globe, we see that sugarcane grows in a broad belt. Nestled above it is a narrower strip where juniper thrives, the Holarctic extending from North America and southern Greenland to East Asia. More than 17 bottles stand on the shelf. A monkey squats beneath a crown on the label of a brand of gin from the Black Forest. To prevent malaria, British East India Company soldiers were given quinine-rich tonic water to drink, with a dash of gin to make it less bitter. I cup my chin in my hands and rest my elbows on the bar top. Solid wood, native oak, it fills almost half the room. In the mirror, I see people come and go, smoking on the street or heading to Kaiser Franz. Biondi is only frequented by those who also go to pasta night at Midway Bar. The place is run by Cuban women with staff from Barbados and Antigua, another world across the way. I peel the foil from the chocolates and break a corner off as a cat hops onto the bar beside me, buries his little face in the bowl of peanuts and eats hastily with loud crunches. Before anyone can chase it away, the cat jumps off the counter and slinks through the humid music into the night. Later, after 1 or 2 more glasses, I step out into the thickening rain. The cat is now eating from a plate outside Midway Bar, while a woman waits in the doorway studying the passers-by, who in turn stare into their miniature navigation devices. Then she stoops for the empty plate and takes it indoors as the cat shakes the water from its fur.
Thank you very much, Jo. And maybe at this point I can bring in Tabea, the author. Hi, hello.
Hi.
And you wrote many of the essays in this collection during lockdown or during social freezing, as you call it in one of the essays of that title, and also for very personal and quite moving reasons. When you were writing, the pandemic, of course, was a global crisis. So I was wondering, when you were writing in that environment, were you writing for a local audience, for an international one, for yourself?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think to write for an international audience would be quite a load. So and I think for reading for writing, it has to. There has something to be there that is moving me, or that strikes me, and in this moment it was this essay, social freezing, you mentioned. I wrote in the first week of lockdown, so I was quite in this shocked, quite shocked as everyone, and it's an essay about the story of my family and all the illnesses that are going back in my family history, and I think it's something that has really to move me, and I never thought that I would be someday able to write about all these stories, because many of the stories in my family were not talked about. So there was also like the Schweigen about all these stories, and in this moment it was, I don't know, I was very like pushed into this text, and it was very personal. It was very it was just my own story, and at the same time, I think it was also in this situation where the whole world was going to this lockdown. It was also something, international and global. So it's hard to say. I think it has to there has to be something that interests me very personally, that I can write about anything. And then I think it's audience that decides if the audience is interested in this topic, or.
It's really remarkable how throughout your essays, actually, your family experiences and stories and memories are constantly woven in, but very much in order to get to broader themes and layers of Swiss history. And you talked about Schweigen there, but it seems to me that they also, these images are kind of created or seep through between the lines. Jo, as I read Tabea, she often juxtaposes images that kind of, through their contrast, touch on social and critical observations. So one example that comes to mind for me is Tabea remembers as a child watching slideshows of missionary work in Papua New Guinea, and then she notes in passing that other children were watching the first war to be broadcast live on television. They're not essays that hit colonialism and violence head on in some kind of explicit way, but these kinds of parallels and juxtapositions keep creating images that unsettle the reader. I wonder, when you were reading her so deeply and translating her carefully, what was it that struck you about the way in which she writes, or about her writing in general?
I think it's exactly that. I think if on a very superficial reading, kind of, if you were to read the text in a hurry, there might be moments where one image is followed by another, or there's kind of a jump in the text or the narrative that kind of makes you think, well, what's that got to do with what came before? And especially translating the text, I mean, by necessity, when you're translating, you have to really spend time with what you're translating and kind of engage with every word of it. But the more the text percolated with me, the more I started to kind of spot little associations between these kind of seemingly disparate images that kind of, painted a picture of kind of broader themes, as you say. So that really struck me. I kind of actually made me think of how I felt when I was reading Polite Spoil with the Culture, which is kind of a series of disparate narratives. And again, it kind of jumps from one location or one idea to another, and you think, what's going on here sometimes? And yet it kind of synthesizes into this whole that has kind of a greater resonance. And I think the other thing that strikes me about Tabea's style is that it's, on the face of it, it's a very subdued voice for me, but there's so much going on underneath it, and she's very much in the kind of show rather than tell vein of writing. She doesn't kind of beat the reader around the head with concepts or lessons or try to ram a point home, but just kind of paints these associations, presents her way of seeing the world, and leaves the readers to draw their own conclusions. But there's always this undercurrent of emotion, which adds to that kind of greater resonance, I think.
And you really see in the translation how you make those connections or those bridges between disparate images are formed through language and through images of language and metaphors. So was this a personal challenge and struggle for you linguistically, or did you talk about that with Tabea? What was the process like of translating? Did you correspond much, or was it important to each have your own kind of authorial voice, as it were? How did you do that?
Well, I'll go first, but obviously Tabea may want to jump in. Yeah, well, on a kind of personal level, it was a really great experience translating this collection, because Tabea was always really open to questions, of which I had quite a few, and but I also felt that she really kind of trusted me to sort of follow my instincts, and I think in that I was kind of inspired quite a lot by what I gleaned from her own style. So because of this kind of broadly associative style, there were moments where I would kind of be struck by an association from my own reading, my own background, and want to bring in an allusion. For instance, there's a sort of half quote from Emily Dickinson buried in one of the essays that wasn't there in the German, but it kind of struck me as such a forceful image, or kind of it was almost the first phrase that popped in my head when I read the German as kind of an English version of it. So I kind of went to Tabea and said, what do you think of this? And the great thing was that Tabea was also always really encouraging of those kind of creative flashes, I guess. And that was
Tabea,
really
was it a similarly creative process for you, or was it unnerving, uncanny to see your work kind of taken apart and reassembled in this way?
No, it was very inspiring for me, because the questions Jozef asked were very specific in a way that he was very aware of all the meanings of one word, and very often I realized when he asked a question what was that there were the meaning of one word is much wider than I thought before. Even in German, and then in English, it's in the translation, in the process of translating, it's something. It's even getting more, and like this way of working and thinking so precisely. It's very it was very precious for me, and very also inspiring in this way, also for my own writing.
That's great to hear. So I should say to the audience that we have at least one other author that I can see on the panel in front of me, and many translators. So at the end of this session, we're going to have a general Q&A, and these relationships will of course be different and creative in different ways from translator to translator and author to author. But just to stick with Jo and Tabea for one last question, Jo, you mentioned Emily Dickinson there. I mean, it struck me how well, I really enjoyed the essay Heidi Makes Use of What She Has Learned, which in that title reworks the title of Joanna Spyri's second volume of Heidi. There Heidi can make use of what she has learned. Heidi kann gebrauchen, was es gelernt hat. And so you see this kind of reworking, appropriation, adaptation of well-known texts and tropes of Switzerland. And I was going to ask you, how do you respond to that technique as a translator? But it sounds like you've gone into your own literary archive and dug up quotes from other traditions. So how did you respond to that intertextuality and bring in your own?
Well, in terms of the Heidi title, that was, I guess, a reflection on how texts get creatively adapted and recreated in translation, because the essay title that I used was taken from one of the many translations of Heidi. That was just the one that seemed closest to the German, but there happened some departures, and in a lot of cases Heidi in translation is just compressed into one volume, and this is the title of volume 2, which doesn't get translated in many editions. So that was in itself interesting to see how one text can have many lives in translation, and to kind of reflect on that as part of the process. But I think also, that essay is also one of my favourites, and I think it's because Heidi is such a kind of enormous cultural figure or presence in Switzerland, and Tabea is not the only Swiss author I've kind of encountered who's reacted to Heidi and kind of reprocessed or retold the story for their own purposes. But what was interesting there was also in Tabea's kind of retelling in brief of certain aspects of the story of Heidi, the actual original story of the book. There was one detail that I was kind of checking against the English translation to make sure that readers who were familiar with English translations or English versions of Heidi would be able to recognise what they were reading in this translation. And there was one detail where it was to do with Heidi having bad dreams in Frankfurt, where I kind of checked against the original and remember querying to Tabea, I can't actually find this at least in the English version of the translation. So is it something that's just in the German? And I think Tabea replied that that was actually taken from some recordings, some childhood recordings or story books that you'd remembered rather than necessarily from a reading of the original book, which again told me that Heidi has this enormous kind of cultural presence that goes beyond the books within Switzerland, which perhaps there was something I had to kind of negotiate against what a British reader or an English language reader would think of that, because obviously they're familiar with the translations and they may also be familiar with spin-off stories of Heidi. But yeah, in the end, I think we qualified it with a perhaps to suggest that this was a kind of an addition to the original story, but we kept the detail because it's crucial to the essay.
I think that's such a great point that Heidi has been adapted and rewritten and translated in so many different contexts. You know, what is Heidi other than a kind of image, or for many a bad dream of sort of kitschy Swissness that keeps reappearing. I like that section too. I suppose you ought to, before we round off, you ought to tell us what is the Dickinson half quote. I missed it as I was listening.
It's it's more just half a line really, but there's a point in the Kestrel lockdown diary where Tabea talks about the light falling into the nest on the Kestrel webcam she's watching, and it's a slant of light in translation, which for me, I don't know, perhaps that's too subtle for anyone to notice, but I was really forcibly struck by kind of the mood of that description and the kind of chiming with the mood of the poem, and thought that could be quite a nice overlap. But
yeah, fantastic. Okay, why don't we bring Lucy back into the conversation, since we're on the theme of Heidi, Swissness, eagles, hiking. We all have images of Switzerland, and when you were editing these 8 chapbooks and bringing them together, did an image of Switzerland emerge for you? Because they are very diverse. They talk about a great range of experiences, very movingly, very subjectively. Or was that idea of Swiss literature a category you just didn't want to work with?
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't admit to this, but coming into it, other than Heidi, did not have a great exposure to Swiss literature or Switzerland, really, even as a country, culture. And I guess that meant I came in without many preconceptions. And maybe that's how this series ended up as so thematically diverse. But yeah, I put out a call out to translators to get lots of text to choose from, and there were definitely certain themes that recurred. I would say definitely the ecological emergency, definitely kind of old age and grief, a few appearances of swimming, which actually the first time I came across you, Seán, was I think your article about wild swimming in Switzerland. So I was kind of in a way hoping to get more of those texts with those with scenes of people swimming in lakes and rivers, and I didn't want to. Yeah, those themes, not the swimming, but the ecological emergency and the grief and old age are kind of heavy, and I wanted to dilute that a little bit, so we didn't end up with the super heavy leaning towards those. Looking at the collection now, I would say the overall image is really of two parts. One, very global, very contemporary, very cosmopolitan, multilingualism, multiculturalism, the pandemic, the global crises, and one of real kind of local sense of kind of provincial identity, particularly the Romansh, but also some of the Italian and the French texts, where, well, I mean, in some of those, in kind of Plouda's text, which Hannah read from earlier, I mean, there isn't, I don't think there is a world outside of that valley in which it's set. And Blackboard as well, incredibly locally contained and traditional, and a lot about the past and kind of really not even Swiss, but that valley's sense of identity. Yeah, and so the pull between those two, yeah, I think I tried very hard not to have any kind of overriding theme or preconception. I wanted to see, like, what are people writing about in Switzerland today? And yeah, I hope that that the collection reflects that.
I think it absolutely does. And just by the by, I'd love to make or read an anthology of texts about swimming to take with you when you go wild swimming.
Yeah.
So that's the next project for somebody. But thing as you mentioned, Hannah, there, and you have two texts from Romansh, which obviously when I was introducing them, I introduced the wrong one. But Hannah, maybe I could ask you to just tell us a little, before we open it up to the floor, about the status of Romansh literature in Switzerland, because that's probably the one literature and language of Switzerland that we know least about from, when we think about our ideas of Swissness from the outside, wherever the outside is.
No, I'd love to talk about it, because it's actually a really interesting landscape, because actually Lucy, I think, summarized the feeling of Romansh literature very well, which is very local and very deep rooted into the landscape and the seasons and local identity. And so a lot of the authors that are writing at the moment are very much older. So when Lucy came to me and asked for contemporary young, I found it quite difficult to find somebody that was under a certain age that was actively writing at the moment. That wasn't in German, because that's one of the main issues, is that a lot of young writers switch to German because they have a wider audience and more of a chance to be published, and because the language is a minority and dying, they're moving towards it because they feel that that's the future for them. So you have this juxtaposition between older Romansh authors that are really trying to keep the roots and highlight the culture and the identity, and poetry is a huge part of Romansh literature as well. And then the younger generation that is exploring another language and another area, because there's a lot of young people moving to more cosmopolitan areas like Zurich, and then moving into German as well.
Fascinating. Thank you very much. We've got 10 minutes, and I'd love to take some questions from those of you in the audience, or if panelists have questions for each other, you can do that by emailing, messaging me directly, or somebody, and we can ensure that you have a chance to speak to each other too. But maybe for those of you who've joined the call, you might have some questions for. We've got Julie as an author and Tabea among us. We also have a number of translators. So, are there any questions maybe on what you've heard or the different processes.
I can kick off if
sure.
So I had, and actually it's for Hannah, so Hannah, you can stay on. So Hannah Hannah has been a translator from German for a long time, if I'm correct, and this was her kind of first published foray into translating from Romansh, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the difference in both your process translating from the two, because I know from my experience of editing, there's not as much, there's no like great online dictionary from Romansh to English or Google Translate or whatever, and also your relationship with the two languages and how that affects your translation.
Yes, I think that's a really interesting question, and actually something that I explored in my master's thesis, because of the exact issue of not having many dictionaries to really move from Romansh to English. So I found that German was a huge part of my translation process with Romansh as well, even whether I liked it or not. I couldn't avoid it, because if I needed a certain word and I was looking for the word in English, then perhaps the German word came to mind straight away, but I was struggling with the English word, or perhaps I didn't know a word in Romansh and I had to look it up, and then finding the multiple meanings, I had to go through German, and then so I had English, German, and then Romansh as well to grapple with and come up with the meaning. And for me, I started falling out of love a little bit with German translation, just because it wasn't literature, it wasn't personal, and it was very it was mainly for medical and technical texts, so it was always very standardized, and so I started disliking it. And then when this opportunity came up, I jumped at it, because just being able to give Romansh authors a voice in English was really exciting to me, and also the language is really personal to me as well. So being able to move somebody's personal experience of Romansh into English through my own personal experience as well, I really felt that I had the opportunity to reflect myself as well as many other Romansh speakers in English, which was lovely. And also the references to images and were very personal to me, and everything that, so from both perspectives, even though they're very different authors, I found things that meant a lot to me too in their writing. So it was a really enjoyable experience. Yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. We have a question from Marinella, and I'm going to direct it at Tabea and Julie as authors. It's quite a big question, Julie and Tabea, but for someone who isn't familiar with, Marinella's question says Swiss Italian literature, so I should probably go to Elena, but we could maybe actually have a tip from Tabea and Julie and then bring Elena in. So for someone who isn't familiar with Swiss literature, any advice on where to start? So maybe Julie and Tabea, you could give one tip of what you're reading at the moment and what someone might like to try, and then Elena, maybe you can round us off with some recommendations for someone who's not familiar with Swiss Italian literature.
So yeah, sorry if the question is Swiss Italian author.
You could go for Swiss French. Sorry,
Swiss French. Yeah. Okay. There are a lot of really good French authors. For example, I'm part of a young authors collective called Ajar, and many of them are also publishing in their own name. And I could say like Bruno Pellegrino is a really good. I really like what he's writing. Also, if I have to say one more name, I would say Anne-Sophie Subilla. Also, I can write it up. And
Perfect. But I think that just gives us a sense of if we want to read more, who we could read, and maybe Tabea, you could say who you're reading at the moment, and then Elena could close us off with some recommendations of where to start with Swiss Italian literature. Tabea.
Yeah, I agree with Julie, and there's a book that comes to my mind that is one of my all-time favorites, and it's in Italian. It's from Silvia Ricci Lempen, and it's called It's Only di Anna. I can write the name and the title, and it's about her own story, her love stories, her queerness. It's a very, very good book, and I hope it's going to be soon translated in English and German. Maybe it is in the meantime, I don't know.
Perfect. So Marinella is going to be busy with her Amazon wish list and perhaps even venturing into some translation. Elena, what would your impression of Swiss Italian literature be today in the last few minutes? What would you recommend to that someone who's curious start with? What's guided you through your journey?
I was just saying hello to Marinella, whom I've had the pleasure to work with as well, also as an editor. So lovely to know that you're here. So I have a general pick and then a more specific recommendation. The general pick is to just have a look at Elvezia. Every year they put out a list of about 10 or a dozen titles that they recommend for translation. Which is how I found Alexander Kninet. Because much like Lucy, before starting on this journey, I really didn't have a great deal of experience with Swiss literature and culture. My very specific recommendation in terms of an author is Julie Guinand, who's actually an Albanian Swiss Italian author. Whom I've had the pleasure to work with during the 2019 VCLT Translation Summit School, which Lucy mentioned at the very beginning of the talk. So it's a very, very powerful author. So I mentioned her background is Albanian, so she's Albanian, and then she left to Switzerland in the early 90s to escape the dictatorship there. So a lot of her books are kind of like set in Albania, but with kind of like the cultural mindset of someone who was then put herself out of that of that place. And rebuild her lives. We worked on a novel who was yet to be translated into English called Piccola guerra perfetta, which is and it's about the horrors of the Balkan War. And we've had one of her books translated into English, Vergine Durata, published by Another Stories in the UK, and the title of Torn Virgin. So I couldn't recommend them more. Like I said, scare yourself, but she's wonderful and a wonderful human as well.
Thank you, Elena. And I see that for those of you that have been following the chat, or maybe have a look at it afterwards, a whole sort of multilingual book club has exploded. So you can check out the recommendations there. Above all, though, the message from today is to read the 8 chapbooks. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to all the authors, the translators, the editing team at Strangers Press. Thank you to the readers today, and for those who've answered questions. Hopefully, I think everyone's had a chance to speak, and we just want to celebrate their work today. And that finishes the event. We hope that you'll go away, read, be stimulated, and in that spirit, goodbye and have a good day. Auf Wiedersehen.
Bye.
Bye.